What's going on, everyone? Anthony from Chronometer Check here, and today we're going to be taking a look at some of the best chronographs under $500. Now, chronograph complications are one of the most functional and my personal favorite because of their practical usage as a stopwatch in day-to-day. With that said, chronographs tend to be on the more expensive side because of their complication. However, there are quite a few chronographs under the $500 mark where they are quite good. Now there kind of is a gap sort of between 500 and 1000, but I do think under 500 there is a lot of value to be had, and sometimes much under 500, as you see on some of the pieces on this table here. So for the full in-depth and most up-to-date list of the best chronographs under 500, check out the link to the blog post in the description below. But with that said, let's get into some of my recommendations. So we're going to take this in order of ascending price, from least expensive to most expensive. So first up, we have the Timex Weekender chronograph. Now, to some people, Timex is kind of known as a whatever brand because you can get it at department stores, rather affordable, but I think all of that is what makes it actually such a great option, especially for a real entry-level piece. Timex is actually a great, reliable watch brand, and if you're someone who's just kind of getting into watches, or you just want to try out a watch, Timex is a really good place to start, and it's hard to do wrong. So the Timex Weekender chronograph in particular is just a very nice looking, rather basic, sure, model, but it's one of those watches that just really gets the job done. It's reliable, has a decent quartz movement, and the typical tri-compact sub-dial design is done, rather plainly, but executed very well and clean. So therefore, I think this is a watch that's very versatile in its design and just can really take you through your life. This particular model comes in at 40 millimeters and is quite versatile. It does have a slightly field but also slightly dressy appeal to it. Now I just threw it on a sort of linen canvas strap just because we're approaching summer here. However, this is one of the more versatile watches in that you can really dress it up, dress it down. And that's why I love Timex. They're cheap, but they do look good and they're decent for what you pay. However, most that use this kind of design do the subdials at 369. However, we clearly see that the subdials here are at 10, 2, and 6, which does break the mold just a little bit to keep things interesting. Now, the chronograph pushers aren't the best to use, so this is kind of like one of the cost-cutting measures. You're not going to get the most tactile kind of feeling. It is a little bit mushy, but regardless, it works, it functions, it keeps good time, it's accurate, it uses a quartz movement. The top left subdial tracks the elapsed minute, the top right subdial tracks the elapsed hours. On the bottom we have the running second hand. Of course, we have the start and stop pusher on the top, and then finally we have the reset pusher on the bottom. Make sure you stop the chronograph before you go to reset it. So great first pick. Budget choice, but I do think it is a great option. Now, next up we have, I know I just kind of skipped around a little bit and there's a very good reason for that, but next we have the Seagull 1963. This is a Chinese military pilot chronograph from, you guessed it, 1963 with the Seagull ST19 movement. Now, what makes this watch so great, aside from the fact that it is truly based on a 1960s chronograph used in the Chinese Air Force, however, one of the really amazing things about it is that you're able to get a fully mechanical, hand-wound column wheel chronograph for under $200 or around $200 depending on where you buy it from. Now that makes this, quite possibly one of the best values on this table in terms of what you get for your dollar. And in general, it's just a very cool watch. You do see it does have gold indices with the 12, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10 layout, a kind of Seiko Alpinist style. Speaking of Seiko Alpinist, this is purely a coincidence, but wrist check today, I'm wearing my Seiko Alpinist Glacier, which does have a very similar hour marker layout. I absolutely love this watch. It's becoming kind of a staple in my collection, and really truly one of my favorite watches that I get to wear. It just sits so close to the wrist, so comfortable. It blends the perfect line between dressy and kind of sporty, rugged, and tough. So I just absolutely love it. I mean, this is a watch that the entire Alpinist line you can really wear doing anything, and that's what this watch has become for me, sort of my do anything watch. But back to chronographs. It does have those kind of fun and a little bit quirky colored handset, which I actually really like, with the red second chronograph hand and the blue hour hands, and we do see the blue hands are also replicated across the subdials at 3 and 9. Giving it a wind is a little bit difficult. The crown is a little bit small, unfortunately, so one of my few gripes with the watch, but in general, give it a wind and we should see the second hand at 9 o'clock start to move. So that's the running second hand. We have the chronograph second hand at 12 o'clock. Obviously the top pusher to start it up. And oh man, one of the best things about the ST19 movement is that it's just so tactile when you do go to click it. It's just absolutely amazing. And then when you do stop and reset the chronograph, it actually is a flyback chronograph. So it snaps right back into place instead of rolling back slowly. So yeah, a really, really cool aspect of this watch. We do have a 30-minute counter at 3 o'clock that obviously tracks elapsed time up to 30 minutes. Really, I rarely ever need to track more than 30 minutes, so that's perfectly fine. Of course, some people probably would like a little bit longer, but it works for me, and for what you get, it's hard to complain. Now, as a similar alternative, because it clearly uses a very similar design and also does use the Seagull ST19 column wheel chronograph movement, this is a bit more of a racing inspired chronograph. As you can see, it has a tachymeter, the Panda style design, and sort of that very 1960s Breitling chronograph kind of style. I really, really love this watch. I'm not gonna lie, I have fallen out of love with homage watches recently, but this is just one that I just can't stop wearing for some reason. I mean, the dimensions are just amazing. 38 millimeters, just like the Seagull 1963. I love the Panda dial. I even love the little unique accent of the counterbalance on the second hand, the little star, which kind of sets it off and makes it something a little bit different, even though it is a bit of an homage. And even at 12 and 6, the hour markers, yeah, it's a little bit weird, and the balance is, it's not a perfectly executed design in my opinion, but for a $200-ish watch, I do like that they at least took some liberty to break the mold from the watch that it was homaging, and it's not like a direct copy. So with that said, still a great value. If you want a little more heritage, a little more history, definitely go with the Seagull 1963 design. But if you're into the racing chronographs, then you can't really go wrong with this Sugess chronograph either, especially same movement, great value. Now, speaking of racing chronograph, it would be not a complete list if I didn't include the Dan Henry 1964. Now, I really, really do enjoy this watch. It doesn't have a mechanical movement like the Seagull or the Sugess, and it is priced similarly, so therefore it does kind of lose out a little bit in terms of just overall dollar for dollar value, but still a fantastic watch. Uses a Seiko mecha-quartz movement, which means it's kind of a hybrid between mechanical and quartz, which, one, gives you the reliable timekeeping of a quartz movement and only really requires a battery swap for maintenance, whereas with mechanical movements, you'll need a lot more maintenance, more frequent servicing, more expensive servicing, and can be a little bit more difficult to maintain. But mecha-quartz, you don't really have that sort of upkeep, so that's nice. On top of that, it does have the smooth sweeping second hand of a mechanical watch. However, it does have a ticking running second hand. So the smooth sweeping second hand is for the chronograph movement. However, there is a tri-compacts or 3 subdial model of the Dan Henry, and the third subdial at 6 o'clock would actually track the current seconds. Now, that one ticks, so that's actually why I got the model with only 2, the bi-compacts model, because it removes that dial. This way, it just feels a little bit more like a mechanical watch now. It's not, so therefore, I will never truly feel like it's a mechanical watch, because it's not. I'm kind of trying to trick myself in a way, but for what it is and for the price, I think it's a fantastic looking watch. I mean, absolutely amazing. It's really fun to be able to wear a watch that kind of feels like a vintage watch without having to deal with the headaches of a vintage watch. So really, really well done. Love the domed acrylic crystal. Love the sizing, I believe 38 millimeters as well. The chronograph is very snappy, very tactile. Also a flyback chronograph. This one actually has a 24-hour counter at 3 o'clock, and we have the elapsed minute counter at 9. You're able to track a little bit more time. It does have a tachymeter around the outside of the dial. There are quite a few different colorways, including a traditional kind of white-black panda, black-white reverse panda, and I believe a blue. I'm not 100% sure on that, but regardless, really, really fantastic looking watch. I absolutely enjoy I'm wearing this one every time I put it on. Next up, we're going to take a look at a couple of watches that I don't actually own currently because they are still great watches, great value, and I do think they should definitely be considered for this list. So first of all, the Orient Neo 70s. I did a review for this watch previously. I'll throw it up in a card and in the description below, but fantastic. Similarly to the Dan Henry, it is a mecha-quartz chronograph, meaning it combines sort of the best of both worlds between mechanical and quartz watches. Looks absolutely fantastic, has that kind of panda chronograph styling straight out of the 70s, very well proportioned, and at around $250 or less, very well priced. Another one, this is actually a recent release, is the Seiko Prospect Speed Timer. Now, for around $500, and sometimes it does tip just over the $500 mark, sometimes a little bit lower, but you can sometimes find this for under $500, and I do think you know, it is a little bit more on the expensive end of the $500 price range, but probably one of the best options. So it uses Seiko solar quartz movement, so extremely accurate, extremely reliable. I mean, the watch itself looks absolutely amazing. Now, it clearly looks a lot like popular chronographs, popular racing chronographs like the Rolex Daytona, and to some extent the Omega Speedmaster, but definitely more of a Rolex Daytona kind of look-alike in a sense. But I do like that it has enough design cues of its own to kind of set it apart. It's just really, really great watch for what you get, and I do think it's, you know, one of them that's hard to beat. There's quite a few different variations, including a panda, a black dial, a blue dial, and even a cream dial that kind of gives a warm kind of nostalgic tone. So next up, we actually have another Seiko. Now this is the Seiko SNA 411, aka the Flightmaster, aka the Flighty. And as you can see, this thing just looks absolutely awesome. It does look very complicated and complex and technical. That's because it is. It does have a ton of functions, more than I really ever use, more than I probably ever will use. So for one, it has a slide rule, which you can use the bezel to kind of line up with the slide rule in the chapter ring to do all sorts of calculations. Something I really don't use in my day-to-day. I probably should learn, but it's just one of those things that I don't really find practical enough for my use, especially we have phones in our pockets. And yet, you know what, you could say that about watches in general, so I'm maybe a little bit of a hypocrite, but it's just one of those that I don't really care to use. But it's still there, it's still very cool that it's there. And I just love that pop of yellow on the second hand and on the bezel. Matches really, really well. Have it on a Marine Nationale elastic style strap, and I just think it just suits the sort of militaristic style of the watch just absolutely perfectly. One thing you can see about this watch, the dome crystal just catches light and reflections. However, I believe it does have AR coating, so it's not actually bad at all. It actually does kind of help cut through the glare and just looks absolutely fantastic. Now at 42 millimeters in diameter, you would think it's on the larger side. However, it only has a 44 millimeter lug to lug and a 13 millimeter thickness. So especially with that very condensed lug to lug, it really fits well on just about any wrist, and it's just a fantastic little chronograph. It does have screw down chronograph pushers, which is absolutely amazing. You know, something you really don't see too often on chronographs in general, but that is to complement its 200 meter water resistant rating. So not only are you getting a chronograph, it's kind of like you're getting a 2-in-1. It's almost like you're getting a dive watch. Yes, I know it's not a dive watch, but it has the functionality, so that's really, really awesome, and I absolutely love this watch because of it. The chronograph function is just okay, at least, you know, tactile wise. It doesn't have a flyback, it's just kind of a normal return to 12 kind of chronograph, but in general, looks great, kind of has that military heritage and also that military look, and is extremely practical in your day-to-day, especially if you do take the time to learn how to use a slide rule. Now this typically is able to be found for around $200. However, recently, and I'm not sure why, they have kind of risen in popularity, and the prices seem to have jumped up to around $350. So approaching that kind of, you know, $300 to $400 mark, they become less of a great option, at least in terms of value, but still a fantastic watch nonetheless. And if you are able to find one for a reasonable price, say $250, maybe $300, I think it's a fantastic watch. Now, maybe one of my favorite options on this list, and probably my personal pick for the best chronograph under 500, is the Bulova Lunar Pilot. Now, for those of you who don't know, this watch has a ton of history. it was actually a recreation of a watch worn on the moon. I did do a full review of this watch as well, so I will put the link. Feel free to check that out for more in-depth. Same with any of these watches that I have reviewed previously. But this watch has been worn on the moon. So NASA astronaut Dave Scott was wearing an Omega Speedmaster to the moon. The Omega broke, but luckily he had his Bulova lunar pilot, the original Bulova lunar pilot with him, which helped him along his mission. So very, very historical watch. This is called the Bulova Moon Watch. It does have an engraving to commemorate the Apollo mission that happened on, but in general, really, really great watch. I do have a couple of small gripes with it, like its size. It's quite a big beast at about 45 millimeters in diameter and a 52 millimeter lug to lug. I mean, this is just, it's a big watch. There's no way around it. And on my 6.5 inch wrist, it kind of looks a little bit comical and a little bit top heavy, a little bit uncomfortable, but for what you get, I mean, if your wrist can pull it off, or if you just don't care, it's a fantastic watch for the price. I love the styling. Obviously, it does look very similar to the Omega Speedmaster in a lot of ways. However, it does have an internal tachymeter instead of an external tachymeter bezel, which I actually like the differentiation there. Love the monochromatic color scheme. Love the kind of sort of subtle sunburst on the subdials to kind of set it apart, add some texture to that matte dial, and increase in legibility. Speaking of which, this watch is absolutely amazingly legible. I mean, those the white indices and handset against the black dial. There's a reason it's so popular in the Speedmaster, and it just works. We do have a sapphire crystal and a nice, very nice brushed bracelet that feels pretty good. Actually, it feels quite solid. And one of my favorite things about this watch is actually the chronograph pushers themselves. Now, it doesn't feel that great to push. Some people have complained that it is a little mushy. Mine actually feels pretty good. It feels quite tactile and good to push, but I love just how broad and wide they are, and I love that it's polished against the sort of smooth satin case. Just such a cool touch, and it's just a joy to use. And you know what? I'm not doing this justice, hold on. I had to mess up my time on my watch for you guys to show the elapsed second hand, which is just one of the coolest things about this watch. I mean, oh man. So this uses a high frequency chronograph movement, and that's how this watch is able to tick so many times per second. It does stop, I believe, after a few seconds doing that, but I mean, it's just so cool. I just love watching it spin. Of course, we do get a very, very smooth sweeping second hand with the elapsed chronograph second tracker. So the Bulova Lunar Pilot uses the Bulova Precisionist ultra high frequency movement, which beats a lot more frequently, specifically 8 times more frequently than a typical quartz movement. So that's how you kind of get that super smooth sweep, and it just looks absolutely amazing. So great watch, a lot of history, great movement inside, and for a reasonable price. You can often find these for easily under $500, sometimes under $400, sometimes around $300. So at which point it's just an absolute steal. Sapphire crystal, the precisionist movement, the history. Unfortunately, it is a little bit large, but hey, just deal with it. If you can deal with it, it's a fantastic watch. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments below what chronograph under $500 you think is the best. And you know what, for a future video, tell me what chronograph you think is the best, period. If you did enjoy this video, I would appreciate if you leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more watch reviews to come. Thanks for watching.